windows of homes and Chapter 8. Escape. Morgan jumped out into Tin Can Alley. Shafts of lights came from back windows of homes and saloons, and the stables loomed dark in the night. He had a Colt in one hand, and with his body he was shielding Louise and Val as they swung to the right, according to his directing hand. A gun suddenly blared close at hand, and by its flash, Morgan glimpsed the dark, vicious face of Chromo. The Indian was crouched behind the stone base of a big stable, was trying to hold them for Salem. "Stop thief, robbers!" The high-pitched shriek came from Blackie Salem. But Wayne Morgan was too busy to bother about Blackie and Burton for the moment. The first slug from the Apache's pistol had torn his shirt and plugged into the wall. The second burned his flesh as he moved, shooting at the flash of the Indian's gun. His bullet hit the rock and spattered into fragments, close to Chromo's eyes. It blinded the Apache long enough for Val to turn out of sight, carrying Louise. Wayne Morgan shifted quickly as Chromo tried for him again. Crouched down, he dueled with the sinister Apache. Salem and Burton were coming on, yelling, "Thief! Robber! Murder!" at the tops of their voices. "They'll shoot me down and swear I tried to hold him up," figured Morgan. It was too hot to remain there. Chromo hunted him with lead, while Blackie opened up with his pistol. Morgan's six-shooter peppered the stone wall sheltering the Apache to hold him for a moment. A close one from Blackie's gun whizzed past Morgan's ear. He leaped up and ran along Tin Can Alley, shooting over his shoulder. Darting into a gap between stables, he was out of their sight for the instant. Harrison and Louise were gone. Val would pick up a couple of fast horses and start for the Star. Morgan meant to lead Salem a chase and give his friends a chance to get away. Men were running out, taking up Blackie's tally-ho, forming into a blind mob to pursue the supposed robber. Aware that Salem, Burton, and Chromo might very well end his career and get away with it by saying he had held the show up, Wayne Morgan circled back along the line of barns. Chromo suddenly darted out, shooting. Morgan blasted the Apache back, knew he had scored a hit, but how serious it was, he could not say in the darkness. At least the Indian stopped shooting. Salem led the pursuit toward Morgan's gunshots. At last, Morgan could dash up to the main street and head for the hammer-headed roan standing in the plaza. He hit leather, and as Salem and the mob emerged hot on his trail, he gave a whoop of triumph, shot into the air, and galloped off in the opposite direction to the Star H. Heated up by the exhilaration of the chase, many of them grabbed mustangs and set out after him, and he rode hard for a time before he shook them off. Then he slowed down and circled back. It was after midnight when he gave his low call, which was answered by Blue Hawk. "I'm going back, Blue Hawk, as the masked rider," he said. "The town's quieting down some." The Yaqui silently assisted him as he changed to the black cape, black Stetson, and domino mask. Slipping on his black gauntlets, the 4-turn page read our companion Western magazine. Featured in the September issue Trail of the Ghost Riders, a complete Texas Ranger novel by Bradford Scott. Thrilling Western, now on sale everywhere, 10 cents at all, stands Mirwadi was now the masked rider. And as the masked rider, he started for Saddleville. The saloons were still brightly lit, men were about the streets, and a light was burning in the log cabin in which Charlie and Joe, the discoverers of the Purple Ridges strike, were living. Dismounting from the stallion, the black-clad figure flitted near, peeked inside through the small, narrow window. The two cowboys were lying in their bunks smoking and speaking in low voices. The masked rider slid around to the front door. Like most portals in that area, it was not locked. The masked rider shoved it open and stepped inside. "Well, gasped the long, slender Charlie as he saw the burly, stalwart figure in black. Through the slits in the domino mask, the masked rider's eyes glinted. "Why, that's the masked rider, Charlie," the wide-bodied Joe cried. "Well?" growled Charlie, pulling himself together and casting a longing glance at his six-gun, which was hanging on the back of a chair several feet from his hand. "What you want, outlaw?" "Do as I say, boys," the masked rider ordered easily, "and nobody'll be hurt. Where's that package of specimens you got back from the government assayers? And I'd like to see the letter, too." "Shucks," Charlie said. "So you're only a common garden variety crook after all. I always heard you was fair and square with folks." "I can't waste any time," the masked rider said, his black stock guns close to his gloved hands. "Better do what he says, Charlie," advised Joe. Charlie agreed with a shrug. "You'll find it all there in the table drawer. Blast you." The masked rider, without taking his eyes off the two cowboys, opened the drawer. He extracted the little box with his left hand and opened it. In some cotton were packed several small rough brilliants, half a dozen of them. They caught the smoky light with scintillating reflections, bluish-white glints coming from the surfaces where they had been cleaned. The letter said, in part, "Gentlemen, the enclosed are rough diamonds of a fine grade. They may occur in any burnt-out volcano country." "Huh?" grunted the masked rider. "Diamonds, and real ones. You picked 'em up in the Purple Ridges country?" "We ain't said where, and we don't intend to," Charlie said hotly. "Go on and shoot if you want to." "I'm not shooting," the masked rider said softly. He tossed the diamonds and the official report on the table and backed to the door. "Thanks, boys. I won't trouble you further." They blinked in astonishment as the masked man jumped out, shutting the door and leaving without taking anything from them. "Funny way to pull a holdup," the masked rider heard Joe exclaim as he flitted past the open window on his way back to midnight. Step by step, the masked rider was working out the mysterious business. These waddies, Charlie and Joe, were decent, honest fellows. They were not liars and cheats, and they had actually picked up rough diamonds in the Purple Ridges. They had been unable to hold in the secret that they had made a strike, although so far they had concealed from the public what their find was and where they had made it. "But Red Yeager," mused the masked rider, "and Blackie Salem too, savvy where the diamonds were found. That's a cinch. They're trying to get hold of the land for the real rush begins. They'd clean up 1,000,000. His fingers slid into an inside pocket and, searching in the usual rubble of such a spot, picked out a tiny, hard object. The small, uneven piece of shiny mineral he had found the night he had started on Salem's evil trail. "By jacks, this is a diamond," he muttered. "One of 'em." He had important facts in his possession now. It was up to him to work out protection for the ranchers who owned the range and honest rushers who might want to purchase claims. It was a startling strike, and thousands of fortune hunters would come in from all parts of the West when it leaked out. He half expected Charlie and Joe to raise a hue and cry, but the two cowboys kept quiet. The masked rider leaped on his great horse and rode with the wind out of Saddleville. "I've got to make sure first that Val and Louise are plumb protected," he muttered low over midnight. "They're the salt of the earth. Salem wants the Star H, and he won't let Harrison marry Louise without a fight." He realized how dangerous the sleek medicine man was, with his Apache killer and the giant Burton ready to do his bidding. And in the masked rider's clever mind was a dark suspicion that perhaps Red Yeager and Salem might be connected. "I'll check that," he thought, "tomorrow night." Picking up Blue Hawk, he rode for the Star H. Shifting to the Wayne Morgan garb, he arrived alone, around 8 in the morning. Harrison greeted him heartily. "All's well," the young rancher told him. "Thanks to you, Morgan. We wouldn't got clear if you hadn't helped us. My Aunt Sophie's taking care of Louise. She is Blackie Salem's niece, you see, and he's made her work in the show for him ever since she was 14. But she's always been scared of him. He's done some terrible things," she told me. "We're going to be married as soon as things quiet down." "That's great," Morgan said. "Now I want you to keep a sharp watch out, Val. Salem's right sure to make trouble, savvy? And Red Yeager's gang is lurking in these parts. How many men you got here?" "3, just now. Cowboys." "Better nothing. Stand a guard after dark and keep your guns loaded and ready. You got no intention of selling your land, have you?" "Nope. I mean to run the ranch for Louise. It'll be our home. Besides, Dad wanted me to keep it." "Good. I'll have a bite with you, and then I'll be riding." "Why not stick around, Wayne?" "Thanks. But I heard of a job over the other side of the ridges." "You're welcome to a riding job here any time," offered Harrison. "That's mighty white of you, Val. Maybe I'll take you up later. Say, you ever hear tell of the Ruby Cliff in these parts?" "Sure," said Harrison. "Everybody savvies where that is. 'Tain't but 6 miles from here, as the crow flies." "Yeah? Can you tell me how to get there?" "Easy. My road runs into the main one through the valleys. You take the second lane to the right after you hit the road to Saddleville. An hour's gallop would fetch you to the Ruby Cliff." "Thanks. Now I could sure swallow a bite and a drink." Wayne Morgan saw Louise Allen after he had eaten. Her face was still more lovely than he remembered it, he thought, but her eyes were still apprehensive. The way she watched Val Harrison showed her love and trust, her pride in her sweetheart. New hope had come to her. When Wayne Morgan rode away from the Star H, connecting with his faithful friend Blue Hawk, they started for Ruby Cliff to look over the land in the daylight. The masked rider was too careful a campaigner to run into a blind trap in the darkness. He meant to meet Red Yeager there. That, he was aware, was placing himself in enemy hands, murderous hands, but he figured what he might learn from Yeager might be worth the terrific risk. Chapter 9. Outlaw and Yellow. Smoky lanterns burned in 2 niches of Ruby Cliff, which jutted into the starlit night. Brush fringed the cliff, and the narrow trail leading to it swung up a slope to enter dense evergreen woods. On the other side, the escarpment was not so steep, but was gullied by rain, making it impossible for a horse to climb it. 6 ferocious-faced men squatted at the base of Ruby Cliff, whose red hue took the rays of the lights with a bloody reflection. A horse's hoofs clopped on the trail, and the waiting outlaws grew alert. "Here he comes," grunted one. A black Mustang that could have been taken for midnight loomed from the shadows. His rider, a man in black cape, gloves and cap with a domino mask covering his upper face. The famous Masked Rider. He saw the sinister band awaiting him and jerked his horse to a quick stop, keeping in the shadow of a tall spruce that tried to challenge the supremacy of Ruby Cliff. "Here I am, gents," he sang out. "Where's Red Yeager?" "He's waiting for you, Masked Rider," a bandit lieutenant called back. "Come on, there's only a few of us. We're friends." "Tell Yeager to come out first," growled the tall man. "All right. Hey, Red." "He's here." A short, wide man shoved out from the bush. Guns were strapped in the double circlets at his waist, with cartridge belts on his barrel chest. Keenly, the masked rider regarded the terrible bandit chieftain, scourge of the country. Before now, he had glimpsed Jaeger only from a distance, and in the dark during that great gunfight at the ranch, where, with only Blue Hawk to cover him, the masked rider had routed the bandit gang alone. Now he saw the outlaw clearly as the lantern light caught the bright red hair, untidy and thick under a strapped Stetson, the ugly features and the cruel lips from which a cigarette dangled. The masked rider dismounted and stepped in to face them all, brutal leader and his armed followers. "Glad you had savvy enough to show up, masked rider," Red Jaeger greeted bluntly. "We ought to be able to make a deal. We're in the same business." "How about the other night, Jaeger?" growled the masked rider. "Shucks. No hard feelings. When I see a good fighting man, I'd rather enlist him than go agin him." He showed his snag teeth in a grin. The wind rustled the tops of the evergreens. A bandit shifted his spurred boot, and a stone clacked as it rolled. The bush was silent. Back a few yards, the black Mustang had put down its muzzle to crop at the coarse bunch grass. The masked rider was in the circle of light from the lanterns now, as were Jaeger and his followers. "I just fetched along a few of my boys," Jaeger went on to explain. "I got plenty more, and we got a cozy hideout back of the ridges. Now here's my proposition. You join up with us, and you can write your own ticket. There's a fortune in what we're doing right now." "We, huh?" said the masked rider. "How many would have to be cut in if I throw in with you?" Jaeger cleared his throat. "The hombre whose idea it is splits 50-50 with me. We pay our men ourselves. I'm giving mine double wages when we've cleaned up. As for you, take your choice of a quarter what I'll get or 1,000 cold cash. The fightin' shouldn't last more'n a few days." "You mean to clean out the purple ridges? And specially the Star H, is that it?" Jaeger's eyes narrowed as he cast a sharp look up into the masked eyes. "You savvy a lot, don't you?" "Why not? I was in Saddleville last night and talked with a friend of yours." Jaeger started. "You mean—" "Blackie Salem," the masked rider finished glibly, and the way Jaeger blinked told him he was right. Salem and Jaeger did have a connection. "Blackie made me a better offer," he said carelessly. "Huh? Well, that suits me. It's all the same. Just fetch your hoss now and follow me. We're going places tonight." "Where?" Jaeger frowned. He was an autocratic leader and did not like to be questioned. "You're working with us now," he growled. "You gotta take my orders, savvy?" "Suppose I got better ideas?" asked the masked rider coolly, standing his ground. Jaeger was losing his patience. "Salem hadn't ought to made you an offer without talking with me first. You're a good fighting man, but you're butt-headed, like I figured. We're riding now, and I want you to do what I say." "Just a sec." The masked rider stepped back quickly. One of Jaeger's men had casually started a round behind him. "You hitting the Star H tonight?" the masked man demanded to know. "If so, I want to know what I'm doing." "You want to know too blasted much? Here, I'll pay you some money on the nail." Jaeger raised his right hand, the masked rider watching it every breath. He had an innate warning, the uneasy sensation of being in a trap. But he had expected that. Red Jaeger was not a man to forgive and forget the terrific beating the masked rider had given his gang. He might buy the masked rider off, but never would he trust him to go on a job. The outlaw who had tried to get around behind the masked man had stopped. He cast a quick look at Jaeger, who frowned and shook his head slightly. Action broke wide open then, without warning. Red Jaeger, imperious by nature, either believed he had the jump on his enemy, or that at such close quarters, no man would dare buck 7-1. The squat chieftain saw his chance to finish off the one man who was standing between the ranchers of the Purple Ridges and Salem's great scheme. Hand rising supposedly to get money out of his inner belt to give to the new recruit, Red Jaeger made his draw, a swift, efficient, and trained pull of a familiar weapon checked and ready to shoot. Jaeger's hand was as used to the movement of that draw as his lungs were to breathing. It had practically come to be instinct. At the same instant, too, 3 of his aides started for their guns, all concentrated on the masked rider. Whether they meant to kill or simply to make him a prisoner was not evident. But probably Jaeger meant to finish him off then and there to get him out of the way. The masked rider, however, had taken everything into consideration. His hands hung easily at his lean hips, with the Blackstock Colts waiting there, as ready for action as Jaeger's fancy guns. His right hand moved like a darting moonbeam, whipped up a gun with the thumb pulling back the hammer spur in a single sweep. Shots roared, several of them, apparently all together, for the explosions joined in a mad medley of sound, echoes banging from the cliffs. Red Jaeger uttered a sharp cry of pain, and his stubby arm never rose to proper killing height. His red-haired hand, holding his Colt, went limp as the weight of the weapon pulled it down. The outlaw chief's slug drilled between the widespread black boots of the masked rider and spanged into the ground. Red Jaeger was in a gun crouch, leaning slightly forward. A strange rasp issued from his writhing lips. He began to shiver. Then his knees buckled, and he did a bizarre dance of death before he fell on his side, the lifeblood gushing from his lungs. The masked rider's first shot had touched Red's heart, a mortal wound, but the masked avenger knew that the fight was just beginning. Jaeger had hoped he would ride into the cleverly prepared trap, and had been sure he would never leave it alive if he proved recalcitrant. The masked rider was within 6 feet of the bandits who had come with Red Jaeger. They were all diving for their pistols. The masked rider had only enough time to put a hurried bullet into the head of the nearest one to prevent the outlaw from shooting point blank into his ear. It was action too fast for breath. Cool, coordinating muscles and brain were vital in such a fight. As the masked rider dropped to his knee, a bullet bit a chunk out of his black sombrero. Another of the quick-draw artists crashed backward. An instant later, one more leaped up and screamed, dropping his revolver and clutching his shattered hip. The masked rider leaped aside, for lead from the others was coming too close for comfort, and as he fired again, still another fighting bandit was put out of action. Screeching profanity, one more outlaw crouched in the shelter of a big rock. The masked rider's slug only kicked shale into the man's eyes, but the lantern light glinted on a steady gun barrel taking aim as the masked rider swung and pounded away. The last of Jaeger's picked band, hugging the stone, folded up, groveling in the dirt. And from up on the steep slope opposite Ruby Cliff still glinted the flashing rifle which had so abetted the masked rider in his triumphant battle. "Good old Blue Hawk," the masked rider muttered. The masked rider had known what he was doing when he had checked that slope that afternoon. And Blue Hawk had been stationed up there, well hidden, before the man in the black mask had ridden into the Narrows. At the base of Ruby Cliff, in the flickering lantern light, lay the dead bandit chieftain and his half-dozen killers. Low moans from a wounded man rose in the air, and a bloody haze seemed to accentuate the color of the rock. "Ain't out of it yet," grunted the masked rider, running with gun in hand. For shouts had sounded from both ends of the trail. As the masked rider had guessed, Jaeger had split his gang and hidden the two bands at either end of the trail to cut off escape. It was a tight trap. Only a much cleverer mind than the one that had plotted it could have countered it at every point. The masked rider could see the outlaws racing in, guns glinting. Bullets began seeking him as his moving, elusive figure was spotted. The gang on his right had reached the black Mustang, and viciously they poured slugs into the animal, taking no chances. The black collapsed in its tracks and quivered, dead before it landed. "We got him! Shoot the dog!" a big bandit bellowed. The masked rider was firing as he ran. He had but a few yards to go to reach the narrow gully that cut up through the steep slope opposite Ruby Cliff. And he made it. Blue Hawk caught the killers against the lantern glow, and his steady rifle picked them off as they dared approach the spot where they might get a clear bead on the masked rider. Appalled by the slaughter and the smart plays the masked rider made, catching them by surprise, they were forced to pause. Blue Hawk's steady zip-zip of rifle slugs broke up the groups. Their shots were going wild, and the masked rider kept low, protected by the gully walls. He mounted swiftly toward the Yaquis' position. None could get near the narrow opening of the gully. It was not shown up in the lantern light, and Blue Hawk kept it clean of killers. "Hey, he's killed Red!" one of them shrieked. The masked rider, panting, made the hard climb like a big spider going over a sand heap. Then he had reached the level where Blue Hawk was crouched in his hole. The Yaqui, with a parting shot, joined him, and the two slid over the top of the purple ridge and out of range of the infuriated outlaws. "I got Jaeger," the masked rider said breathlessly. Good work. They meant to strike Harrison's tonight. This'll put a crimp into their plans. I was right, Blue Hawk. Blackie Salem had tied up with Jaeger. They're after the land so's they can sell it to the rushers. Down on the other side of the ridge waited their horses, Midnight, the handsome black stallion, the Pinto, and Blue Hawk's wiry gray. "Sorry that Star H Mustang I borrowed was killed," muttered the masked rider, "but I didn't dare take Midnight into that trap." He had plenty to think about. With only Blue Hawk to help, he had to finish off Blackie Salem and his crew, and Jaeger's men would now be thirsting even more than ever for his blood. He had killed their leader, and such men would want revenge. Chapter 10. Pressure. After Wayne Morgan had left him, Val Harrison made plans for guarding the Star H. He whistled as he went about his work that day. Every so often he had to go in and kiss Louise, for his love for the girl seemed increasing hourly. She alone could comfort him, since the death of his father could take the sting out of the shock he had undergone. "I just can't believe she's mine," he murmured over and over. The hours sped swiftly, with Louise near. She was interested in the ranch, and walked around with him as he proudly displayed his blooded Arab strain horses, used for improving the Mustang breeds and his prize cattle. She had been with the traveling tent show as long as she could remember, forced to the life by Blackie Salem, who claimed she was his niece, but always she had yearned for a real home. Louise and Val were out of the ranch house most of the day, finally returning when Val's Aunt Sophie called them to supper. Aunt Sophie, a kindly, middle-aged woman, the only sister of Val's father, had taken Louise under her wing wholeheartedly. After dark, Harrison put one of his men out to ride the circle of the ranch buildings, to keep a sharp eye peeled for any signs of attack. Around 10 o'clock, Val sat with Louise and his aunt in the brightly lighted, spacious living room, talking of their wedding and future plans. "I'm sure happy," Val cried. "Louise, you make the whole world look good. I just know—" What else he would have said was cut off as a quick double whistle sounded. Val Harrison jumped up, grabbed his gun belt, and strapped it on as he hurried out to the veranda. His patrol, Billy Devlin, rode up, pulling his horse to a sliding stop. "Hey, Val," Devlin sang out. "You got a caller. It's Blackie Salem, that slick medicine show man." Harrison frowned. "Is he alone?" "Yeah, I stopped him at the gates." "What's he want?" "Just a word with you," he says. "He claims he don't mean no harm." "All right, let him ride up, but keep to his saddle. I don't want any truck with him." Devlin spurred back down the long lane to the main gates, and after a time, Blackie Salem cantered in, riding a dark chestnut stallion. "Good evening, Harrison," Salem called coolly. "Well," growled Val, "you got your nerve with you, riding up to my door, Salem. What you gotta say?" "Just this, my young friend. You've run off with my ward and niece. I could have the law on you for that." Harrison laughed. "Well, I'll be danged. If the law ever hears of the way you've treated her, Salem, they'll skin you alive. We don't cotton to skunks, like you, in these parts. Now, if you got nothing else to say, sashay, Louise is marrying me next week. Savvy? I'll give my consent and $5,000 for the Star H," Salem said quietly. "I don't need your consent and wouldn't sell to you for any price. Now get. You're a murdering polecat." "That's your last word?" "Final." Blackie Salem swung his horse and galloped away. Harrison went back inside. Louise's face was pale, and she trembled as she put her hand on Val's. I heard what he said, Val. I've brought you danger and trouble. Maybe it would be best if I went back to the show." "Don't talk that away, please." She shook her head. "I love you, Val. That's why I can't bear to cause you such worry. You don't know Blackie as I do. He's ruthless. He'll be back." "We're all ready for him," Val Harrison promised grimly. That night he slept with one eye open and without removing pants and shirt. Now and then he heard Devlin's quiet, slow patrol as the cowboy rode past his open window. Louise was sleeping on the other side of the big house next his aunt's room. A half-moon had risen to join the stars and gave a faint light to the cool Arizona world. The night sounds of horses and cattle came to him, but did not disturb him any more than did the piping of frogs. They were as familiar to him as the aromatic breeze. Val Harrison's one big thought was how best to protect Louise. He decided that in the morning he would send for the county sheriff, whose offices were 100 miles away to the east of the Purple Ridges, and demand that Salem be arrested. No doubt the sheriff already had heard of Red Yeager's raids, and probably had begun to collect a big posse to scour the hills for the outlaws. "He'll have his hands full, but he's got to help me out at too," thought Harrison. He picked up his big watch, a gold turnip affair which had belonged to his father. By turning it to the moonshaft from the window, he could see that it was 25 minutes after 1, and it was at that exact minute that a quick succession of roaring gunshots burst out. "Watch it, Star H," he heard Devlin yell. "Here they come!" Leaping from his bed, Harrison snatched up his double-barreled shotgun and some shells ready at hand and ran into the front room in his bare feet. The big yard was in an uproar, and through the window, Harrison saw death flaming from many guns. Dark figures of horsemen sped toward the house. The two other men that Val Harrison had besides Devlin had bunked in the kitchen lean-to for the night. They came rushing to join him, weapons in hand. "Cover Billy Devlin!" Val cried, taking a stand at the front window on the right. Devlin was fleeing for shelter ahead of a large band of men, but evidently his horse had been hit, for suddenly the Mustang staggered and went down. Devlin jumped, but the attackers swept up on him, pouring bullets into him from close quarters in spite of the covering fire from inside the house. Harrison picked off one attacker, and another crashed from his cowboy's bullets. Then the gang broke up and swept into a wide circle, yelling and shooting in. "It's Red Yeager's bunch," called Fred Blenheim, one of Val's waddies. "I don't see Yeager, though." Nor could Harrison. They seemed to be led by a tall, dark figure in a black cape. The man's face was a black blob in the faint moonshine, masked. He kept well back, out of range. "Maybe that's the masked rider," Val thought, then shook his head. From what he had heard, the masked rider had opposed these bandits. Slugs were biting chunks of wood from the window and door frames, and the hullabaloo rose to the sky. Behind Val and his men, a woman's voice cried out. Then his aunt emerged from her room, with a lighted candle lantern in one hand and a six-shooter in the other. "Douse that light, Aunt Sophie," shouted Harrison. "See if Louise is all right. Watch out for her while we fight." His aunt blew out the candle and stepped to Louise's closed door. In a moment, she came hurrying to Harrison. "Louise's door's bolted," she cried. "I can't make her hear me." A .45 bullet whipped inches over them. Harrison started for Louise's room, keeping down low to dodge the bullets whirling through the windows. His two men had taken the sides of the big house, but there was a lot to cover. Blenheim was at the back corner, nearest Louise's room. He was reloading his guns, squatted on the floor by the window. Crashing explosions outside and tearing lead thick as flies kept him down. He cursed as a splinter cut his cheek, the blood spurting. "They're mighty hot here, Val," he gasped. "I can't get up to make a shot." Harrison was banging on the girl's door. "Louise, open the door! Come out! Bandits are attacking!" There was no reply. Val put his big shoulder to the wooden panel. With a mighty heave, he burst the bolt inside from its moorings and crashed through. "Louise!" he shouted. Cold wind hit him full in the face from the wide-open window. In the dim light, he saw at a glance that the bed and room were empty. She was gone. Stricken with horror, throat drying with alarm, Val Harrison lost his head and rushed to the open window. He saw gunmen right outside, but did not see that they had Louise. As they sighted him framed in the rectangle, moonlight glinted on their rising guns. In fury, Harrison poured bullets into them. Curses and shots answered him, and they could not miss. He felt the terrific shock of striking heavy bullets, and was whirled around by the impact as he fell to the floor. Chapter 11. The Rush. Painstakingly detouring through dense chaparral and around steep, razorback red ridges, the masked rider and Blue Hawk got back on the valley road. They rested for a time beside a deep pool gouged from the rock by the force of a 60-foot waterfall where a mountain rill fell to the lower reaches of the land. Here they could drink and water their 4 animals and bathe the wounds they had taken in the swift, hot fight against overwhelming odds. Blue Hawk had been cut by flying splinters of redstone and lead when the gang had peppered his eyrie during his coverage of the masked rider's escape. The masked man himself had felt the burn of several slugs at close quarters and had been bruised in his run up the cliff. "We better hustle for the Star H, Blue Hawk," the masked rider said, when he was ready to mount Midnight. They might not attack that ranch tonight, with Red gone, but I want to make sure. It was nearly 2 a.m. when the two riders heard gunfire. It came from the Star H, and as they galloped up, the smashing of the firearms grew louder. "That's Yeager's bunch, sure as gun shoot," exclaimed the masked rider, checking his own gun with his supple fingers. "I'm going to bust it up, Blue Hawk." "Si, senor, they do not quit." Shotguns, rifles, and pistols roared. Men were firing from the windows, while about the ranch house rode the ravening Yeager outlaws, sending torrents of lead into the place. Low over his great black horse, the masked rider unhesitatingly locked horns with the bandit crew. He charged in at them, both Colts going full blast and guiding Midnight with knee pressure. His deadly weapons picked two outlaws off their Mustangs before they realized he raged in on them, his gun blazing, bullets singing. "The masked rider," came hoarse shouts. Blue Hawk, back in the dark near the fence, was shooting at the bandit line with his Winchester. It was much like the fight at the Bee-in-a-Box, save that Red Yeager no longer led the outlaws. And then it was that the masked rider glimpsed a sinister, masked figure in a black cape much like his own, well off to the left, out of harm's way. This time, however, the outlaws made little resistance when they found the masked rider upon them. They shot back at him, but quickly retreated, heading off for the wild country with their new chief in the van. Never letting up in his fire, the masked rider drove them from the ranch of his friend. Swinging a wide circle, the masked rider rejoined Blue Hawk. "I've got to be Wayne Morgan here," he told the Yaqui. "I'll take your hoss, Blue Hawk. Watch out for Midnight and my outfit." Swiftly he removed the black cape, the mask, gloves, and hat. Beneath that garb was the clothing of the wandering waddy Val Harrison knew. Riding in, bareheaded, and breathing hard, he sang out to the men in the house. "Where's Val?" he cried. "I'm Wayne Morgan. Heard there was an attack on the ranch and hustled over to get in the scrap." "You're too late, Waddy," growled Blenheim. As he opened the ranch house door for Morgan, he was mopping blood from his face as it slowly ran down from a clipped scalp. "The fight's done finished. The masked rider come along and chase them skunks into the chaparral. You see anything of him?" "I reckon that was him went by me like blazes. Where's Val?" "In there." Blenheim pointed. Morgan strode over to a bedroom where a lamp was burning. Val's Aunt Sophie was sitting on the edge of a narrow cot, a basin of water and a blood-stained cloth in her hand, as she tended Harrison, who lay stretched on the bed. "He's still unconscious," Aunt Sophie told Morgan. "The poor boy's badly hit." Morgan swore inwardly as he stepped over and saw to what extent Val had been wounded. The blood came from a furrow in his scalp. A bullet path cut through his coppery hair, some of which his aunt had scissored off. "That wound's not serious," she told Morgan, "but he's got one in the left thigh too, and I'm afraid his leg's broken." "Where's Louise?" demanded Morgan. The sadness deepened in the woman's face. "When the attack started, she was in her bedroom over there, asleep. But when Val broke in the door, she was gone. I guess those horrible bandits carried her away with them." Fury smote Morgan. His teeth gritted and his nails dug into his calloused palms. "Be back later," he said thickly. He crossed to the room Aunt Sophie had pointed out as Louise's. At once it was plain that the girl had been spirited through the window. He took a lighted candle in his hand and leaned out the window. In the soft, sandy dirt, he made out a footprint, not a boot impression, but a long oval mark. "Moccasin," he muttered. When he went back to the living room, Blenheim and the other cowboy were busy treating their wounds. They hardly glanced at Morgan as he left by the front door. Mounting, he rode to where Blue Hawk waited for him. "Blue Hawk!" he exclaimed. "Them skunks carried off Louise Allen, Val's girl. Go round to the north side of the house, savvy, and you'll see a candlelit room, the third window from the porch. I left the light there. I'll see nobody bothers you while you check up." "See!" The Yaqui started running, swiftly and silently, to obey. Wayne Morgan returned to the living room. Blenheim had brought a bottle of whiskey in from the kitchen and was sharing it with his waddy mate. "Thanks. Don't mind if I do." Morgan took a drink and began questioning them about the night attack. He kept the two cowboys occupied with excited conversation until presently he heard a faint, seemingly far-off cry, the wail of a mountain lion. Blue Hawk's signal. He left the cowboys then, with an excuse of seeing to his horse, and hurried to join the Yaqui. "Apache!" grunted Blue Hawk as Morgan reached him, his dark eyes glinting as he watched Tall Waddy's grim face. "Sneak in like shadow. Gag her. Carry her out. Make no noise. Savvy?" "I savvy. That's Sidewinder, Chromo." He thought for a moment, then said, "It's up to you, Blue Hawk. Can you trail that Apache devil?" Blue Hawk clucked in his throat, always a sign he was pleased. His brown, lean hand patted the long knife in his crimson sash. "Yaqui against Apache," he murmured, "is good. Stay on the trail, and don't rest till you come up with Chromo. He's Blackie Salam's ace." He gave Blue Hawk quick word pictures of the girl, the Apache, Salem, and Buff Burton. "I'll likely need midnight," continued Morgan, "so I'll keep him, Blue Hawk. I can pick up a bronc here to ride around in the open." "Bueno." Blue Hawk touched his friend's hand, mounted and rode off into the darkness. When Morgan returned to the ranch house, he found Val Harrison breathing more easily, but still unconscious. "I reckon Saddleville's the next stop for me," mused Morgan. Chromo might possibly take Louise Allen back to the tent show. Also, Morgan had a whole skeleton of bones to pick with Blackie Salem. It was time to crush the showman and his evil crew. "Arizona ain't safe," he muttered, "till Salem's cooked." It was afternoon when Wayne Morgan reached Saddleville, and the town hummed with activity. On his way, Morgan had passed numerous riders, men with intent, serious faces and gleaming eyes, hurrying into the purple ridges. Some led pack horses laden with miners' tools, short-handled picks and shovels, washing pans, and grub. A crowd was around Blackie Salem's tent show. Salem was in the big tent, but no performance was going on. Instead, Blackie sat behind a box table, pen and ink and papers at hand. He was selling claims, mining claims, chunks of land from the Circle 2 ranch, where Red Yeager's gang had struck so savagely and successfully, killing the owner and breaking up that happy family. The widow had optioned her property to Salem, and he was disposing of it to eager buyers. Wayne Morgan had ridden in on a borrowed Star H Mustang. He had midnight in a safe hiding place not far from the town, so that he could pick up his black and his mass rider outfit when he wanted it. He edged into the tent, keeping to the rear. In a low voice, he spoke to a man awaiting his turn to buy a claim. "What's the rush for, hombre?" "Huh? Why, heck, stranger, they found rough diamonds in the Purple Ridges. A couple of waddies picked up a bunch. And yes, Tiddy Moore was discovered on the Circle 2 range. Claims are rising in price every hour, and I aim to be in on the start." Morgan filtered out, suspicion rising, and snooped about the wagons and smaller tents. He could find no signs of Chromo or of Louise Allen. Evidently, she had not been brought to Saddleville. "Well?" a harsh voice snarled. "What you want, Waddy?" He swung quickly. The ugly giant of the shaven pate Buff Burton, was glaring at him. "Why, howdy, Buff," Morgan said pleasantly. Warily, he eyed the big fellow. Burton's muscles bulged with might. In his grip, almost any man would be helpless, once Buff got his hold. "What you snooping round here for?" demanded Burton. His small eyes narrowed. Salem and Buff knew Morgan only as a friend of Harrison's. They could have no idea that this wandering cowhand was the great masked rider. "I'm hunting for a waffle truffle, Buff," Morgan said solemnly. "Huh?" The giant stared stupidly. Wayne Morgan realized the terrible peril confronting Louise Allen, held someplace by the murderous Chromo. If Salem decided it was necessary to protect himself, he would order Chromo to kill her. "Oh, Buff!" That was Blackie Salem calling his man. The show owner appeared at the back flap of the main tent. When he saw Wayne Morgan, he scowled and came strolling over, a burning West Indian cheroot clenched in his teeth. "Well, what's up, Morgan?" he demanded. Morgan had to think fast. "Harrison sent me, Salem," he told the showman. "Says he wants to talk business with you." Salem's eyes gleamed. "All right," he said. "I'll ride over later on. I meant to call on him anyway." Wayne Morgan nodded, swung, and went over to the saloon. "At least I know where Blackie'll be this evening," he thought. From the saloon windows he watched the bustling town as the evening shadows purpled the ridges. The place was crowded with rushers seeking claims and grub stakes, outfits to start prospecting. If Salem had the Star H now, thought Morgan, he'd clean up $1 million on it. It's right in the heart of it all. He got the circle too. That was lucky for him. Or was it? Night fell. Morgan had some ham and eggs and coffee, thinking as he ate that a big showdown was rapidly approaching. More and more, he felt that there still was something about the whole affair on which he had not yet put his finger. But what it was, he could not guess. Still, he saw no signs of Chromo or Louise. Salem savvies how Val loves her, he thought, and likely is holding her hostage. And 100-to-1 Val will trade his ranch for her. He kept an eye on all the men who entered the saloon, but his interest was not claimed until after dark a slight fellow came in and shoved up to the bar for a drink. Chicago Elms had come back in town. The ferret-faced little man looked grim. His washed-out eyes flitted back and forth as he slammed money on the bar and demanded whiskey. He consumed several glasses, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, set his shoulders determinedly, and stalked out. Now what's he after? Wondered Morgan, as he watched Elms go straight over to the plaza and disappear in Blackie Salem's tent. This is getting interesting. Leaving the saloon himself, Morgan took a roundabout way to the tent show in the plaza. Buff Burton slouched at the front of Salem's living quarters, but Wayne Morgan managed to get near enough in the rear to overhear what Salem and Elms were saying. It was some minutes before he had crept within earshot, though using the shadows cast by wagons and poles. "Shucks," Chicago Elms was saying in his high-pitched voice. "I lost that stake you gave me in Tombstone right off the bat. I want more, Blackie. In fact, I want half." "I see," Salem said easily. "So, you heard about it. You always were a quick one, Chicago." "No use trying to pull the wool over my eyes, Salem. Flattering me that way," growled Elms. "I want my cut, and if I don't get it, I'll tell everything. You spread word the masked rider robbed me of him, but now I know you did it. You've got a good racket, and I want in." Blackmail, thought Morgan, ears wide open as he lay pressed flat in the warm dirt behind the tent. Now, with suspicions running riot in his mind, he was seeking to join all the clues he had run upon into a clear-cut picture. He decided to do some further checking on Chicago Elms. "Don't worry, Chicago," Salem was assuring the little man. "You're in. There's plenty for us all. Tonight I'm on my way to the Star H where the first strike was made. We've got to sew it up tonight. Now. Because the cowboys who picked up those diamonds have already let the cat out of the bag." "I'll go with you," said Elms. "Just what I was going to suggest," Blackie replied. "Have a drink." He sang out, "Oh, Buff." And as Burton waddled into the tent, he said, "We'll be riding for the Star H in an hour, Buff. Have our 3 fastest horses saddled and ready. Well, hurry up and see to it." Morgan backed off and hurried away. At the telegraph office, he sent a wire to Summers Brothers, the name he recalled from the letter that had been in Chicago Elm's pocket when the masked rider and Blue Hawk had found him unconscious on the trail, in care of the chief of police, Chicago. When the operator had sent the message, Morgan waited around for the reply, smoking. It was nearly an hour before it came, and he read it quickly. His face slowly cleared as he took in the startling information he had obtained. "I'll have to trail him to the Star H," he was thinking as he hurried away. Chapter 12. The Night Trail. Low on the jagged-edged horizon, the moon peeked through one of the narrow passes between the purple ridges. Stars were milky overhead, and a gentle wind stirred the dry pods of mesquite and rustled the chaparral. Blackie Salem was riding through that night, with the heavy Buff Burton on his right, and the slight Chicago Elms, never a good horseman, on his left. "Hey, how far we got to go, Blackie?" complained Elms. "My teeth are jolted out now. I got a headache." "I reckon you had too much to drink," Salem remarked suavely, "before you came to shake me down, Chicago." "Well, I don't feel it now. I'm cold as ice." Elms shivered and his teeth chattered. "I believe I'll drop out, and you can pick me up on your way back, Blackie." Chicago Elms, an experienced thief, did not like the tone that had come into Salem's voice. Nor did he fancy the dark shadows, the up-and-down wilds through which Salem had insisted on shortcutting. "I believe you better stick with us," Salem said mockingly. "Oh, now, Blackie, you ain't sore at me, are you? After all, I got it coming to me." "Yes," Salem agreed frigidly. "You got it coming, Elms." They had all stopped by now, and beside Elms was the powerful Burton, while Blackie Salem loomed ahead, blocking off any wild attempt the small fellow might make to spur off and run for it. Chicago Elms understood now. Salem was going to kill him. His breath hissed in and out as he strove desperately to plead with his erstwhile partner in crime to spare him. "Why, we've been friends for 10 years, Blackie. Remember how I staked you that time in Omaha? I don't hold any hard feelings for what you done to me, do I? Fact is, I'll take whatever you want to give me and blow. Grubstake me, and I'll leave and never—" "Dry up," snapped Salem. "He's yours, Buff." Chicago Elms was almost fainting with terror. Death was upon him, and he did not want to die. "No, oh, please, Blackie," he chattered, but Buff Burton seized the small man, easily holding him, despite all Elm's struggles. Blackie Salem swung his big horse. "I'll have to hustle, Buff. Don't make too much noise about it. There's a camp full of rushers over on the next slope." "Okay, boss," Buff Burton said carelessly. He shook Elms until the small man's teeth rattled, then, helpless in the giant's grip, Chicago Elms slid from his saddle while Burton dismounted, throttling him. Don't kill me, Buff," pleaded Elms with his last gasp of breath. I always do what the boss tells me," growled Burton. "You fool, you shouldn't try to shake him down." Burton threw Elms to earth and fell on him. The weight of the big fellow knocked the remaining breath from Chicago, and pain racked his body. The world swam before his dimming eyes as the terrible fingers vised on his throat, crushing the cartilage. Buff Burton was taking such pleasure in making his kill that he failed to see the tall, black-clad figure that loomed suddenly against the patch of moon sky, coming silently along the trail. The masked rider, having shifted to his mystery garb, had taken up the scent, following the trio at a safe distance. When they had stopped, he had slid off midnight and crept up, in time to hear Chicago Elm's frantic pleas for mercy. "Here's my chance," he thought, as he stole in. Salem was not far away yet. On the ground in the patch lit by moon and stars knelt the tremendous Burton, finishing off Chicago Elms. The masked rider got around to the back of the giant, for he knew the man's lion strength. Drawing a six-shooter, he made a sudden rush that took him within a yard before the slow-moving Burton realized anyone was near. Buff Burton wore no hat, so his shaved head was unprotected. The masked rider made no sound as he struck at once, his Colt barrel landing square on Burton's skull. The steel connected with a sharp crack. An ordinary man would have keeled over instantly, but Buff Burton was no ordinary man. He had the strength of three. All he did was let go of Chicago Elms and turn with a snarl of fury. A shot, the masked rider knew, would bring back Salem. He slashed out with the gun sight as Burton reached for him. The giant's left eye was cut and closed, but he got his hand on the masked rider's wrist and jerked him in, seeking to squeeze him to death. Never had the masked rider been in greater danger of death. If Burton once got that grizzly bear grip, he would never let go until his foe was senseless. And the pistol was offline as Burton pivoted, feet solid, on the earth. The masked rider, however, was a master at wrestling. He let go suddenly, traveling along with Burton's yank, and shoved his leg behind Burton. The big man tripped, and the masked rider went sailing on over his head, brought up short as Burton still held his hand. He was slammed violently to earth as the strong man gripped him, but managed to hit Burton's knuckles with his revolver barrel, smashing them hard. The giant had to let go. For a moment, the masked rider was free. He crouched there, gun cocked and covering Burton. "I'll shoot if you move, Buff," he snarled. But Burton was coming on. In the silvery moonlight, he looked like some huge animal. He was cursing the masked rider, and red fire darted from his little eyes. He would not quit, even under the gun, but lunged straight at his enemy, maddened by the clever parrying of the man in black. Though the masked rider knew that in all probability it would bring Salem back, which would spoil his game, he was forced to shoot. As Burton jumped him, and the masked rider was crowded back, he rammed the Colt muzzle into Burton's belly and raised his thumb off the hammer spur. The big fellow's clothing and stomach muscles muffled the report. Exploding powder burned the masked rider's hand. He felt Burton's enormous weight falling on him, crushing him, and Burton's terrible great hands gripped him. Those fingers had him at last, and he could only struggle ineffectually as Burton ripped at his throat. The gun had been torn from his burning, numb fingers. The masked rider, with so many narrow escapes to his credit, had never been so close to the end. He was fighting to the last, seeking to ease Buff's hold, but the precious seconds that flew by without air pumping into his bursting lungs only made him weaker. His eyes bulged, and he knew that blackness was but instants away. As the world danced before his vision, the masked rider steeled himself for the end. Suddenly, the masked rider drew in a gasp of life-giving, priceless air. He was able to strain once more against the overwhelming fate which had claimed him. Then the vice shut again on his windpipe. His shirt front was soaking wet. Buff Burton was pressed close over him, and his breath came in terrific heaves. Just as the masked rider thought he could fight no longer, Burton's fingers a second time relaxed, and the man in the mask, pinned beneath him by the trained wrestler and his enormous weight, breathed another time. Hope came back to the masked rider. He steeled his soul, tensing to hold off the force of his deadly enemy. The third brief spell came sooner than had the second, and the ensuing throttling did not last as long. The masked rider felt a fierce joy. Buff Burton was weakening, and just as swiftly as he had been pinned, so was he released when Buff Burton lost all power in his limbs, shook his head groggily, grunted, and rolled over. Painfully, the masked rider dragged himself out from under the giant. He drew a gun, watching carefully as he regained his wind and pulled himself together. But Burton never moved. After a time, the man in black, whose shirt front now was red with Burton's blood, knelt beside the giant and checked. There was no heartbeat. Buff Burton was dead. "My bullet hit him right," muttered the masked rider, "but it took time to kill him." His .45 caliber slug had lodged by Burton's heart. Most men would have died instantly. But the strong man had kept going for moments that had nearly cost the masked rider his life. Finding a canteen hanging from Burton's saddle, the masked rider took a drink. He bathed his burning face, felt of his torn, bruised throat. He was aching from the beating Buff had given him, but he was all in one piece and had no serious injury. "Quit! Please don't! Cut it out, Buff!" The masked rider swung quickly. He had forgotten Elms, occupied in his struggle with Burton. Those moments had been breaths of eternity, dragging out in his mind to interminable periods. In his mask and cape, he knelt by Chicago Elms and trickled water between the little man's teeth. Soon Elms awoke and stared fearfully up at the masked face. "Hey," he whispered. Who are you?" "The masked rider." "Where's that big murderer?" "Him and me had a little tussle. He's dead." "I don't believe it," exclaimed Elms incredulously. "If you don't, go take a look at him." Elms got up and staggered over. Burton was dead all right. "Well, dang it, outlaw, you sure done a good job. He's cooked, curse him. I never thought one man could finish that walkin' mastodon." Chicago Elms was well pleased. "I'm in the same line as you, masked rider," he hurried on. "I thought it was you who held me up on the road to Saddleville one night, but I know now it was Blackie Salem and his Lobos." Elms offered the makings, and they smoked. "I'll get square with Salem if it's the last thing I do," promised Chicago. "He told Buff to kill me, and I'd be finished now if it wasn't for you." "Suppose you'd tell me the whole tale, Elms," said the masked rider softly. "From the time you left Chicago, with the police at your heels. Marie'll be glad you ain't killed." Elms started violently, licked his thin lips. His scared eyes sought the slitted holes of the domino mask, trying to read how much the masked rider knew. To cinch it, the masked rider drawled, "I got a wire in my pocket from Summers Brothers, Chicago. Now I savvy the whole game. You might as well help me." The little man gulped, but then he began to talk. "Why don't we throw in together?" he asked eagerly when he had finished his tale. "A good idea," said the masked rider. "Anyhow, for a while, till this is over. I won't hurt you, Elms, so don't get excited. But I need you, and I don't want to lose you. I'm tying you up." "Oh, please, masked rider," whimpered Elms. "Let me go." "Later. if you help me and behave." He trussed Elms and tied him to a horse. Then he changed to a fresh shirt he had in Midnight's saddlebag, and adjusting his guns and mounting Midnight, he rode after Salem, leading Chicago's Mustang. They had ridden but 3 miles when Midnight sniffed, rippled his hide. He had smelled other horses up ahead. Tying Elm's horse to a tree, the masked rider left him there, gagged and bound, unable to escape. The masked rider proceeded cautiously, ever alert. Soon he heard the thud of many hoofs and drew Midnight off the trail, concealing himself. He could look down and see a moonlit patch of trail. On it appeared a big man in a black cape with a mask over his face. Masked outlaws, unquestionably Red Yeager's gang, followed him. The masked rider heard Blackie Salem's voice, giving final orders. "I'll go in first, boys. If he won't sign up, we'll make it final tonight. This is our last chance to take this Star Age. It's worth a fortune, and we'll clean up in the next few days if we get it now. I believe Harrison will give up to me when I talk to him. If not, we burn him out and kill him all." The show owner had taken over leadership of what remained of Yeager's crew. He was the man in the black cape, so much like the masked rider's own. Chapter 13. Bargain. Instead of following the outlaws directly, the masked rider went back and picked up Elms and headed for an adjoining ridge. A campfire burned up there, in a camp of rushers who were seeking diamonds in the purple ridges. It was not far, and soon the masked rider rode in, rousing the burly citizens who were sleeping, wrapped in their blankets. There were 200 of them, and they stared curiously at the masked rider. Some were alarmed, but the masked rider soon put them at ease. In a few quick words, he told them startling facts he had learned. "Ain't got time for it all now, gents," he said. "Give it to you later. I want you to do what I say, and take charge of this prisoner, Chicago Elms." "We're with you, masked rider," the man who apparently was their leader growled. With a few final words of instruction, the masked rider started the Black Stallion for the Star H, his plans all set. He did not approach the Star H directly, but dismounted well out from the buildings and started to flit in, keeping to the dark spots. Lights shone in the living room, and a saddled horse stood at the hitch rack. On the porch, alert, a shotgun in his hands, stood the waddy, Fred Blenheim. The masked rider eased up the window of the room from which Louise had been snatched by the villainous Chromo and got inside. Tiptoeing to the door, he heard the voices of Blackie Salem and Val Harrison. When he peeked through a crack of the door, he saw Harrison, his leg in a splint, lying on a sofa, while Salem stood near, talking coolly. "Yes, I've got Louise, and in a safe place too, Harrison," Salem informed the young rancher. "Chromo is taking care of her, and she won't be found easily." "You're a dirty dog, Salem," growled Val. "Let's skip all that and get down to brass tacks," the showman said coldly. "I'll put my cards on the table. You want Louise, and I want the Star Age, here and now. Sign over your spread to me, and promise not to make me any future trouble, and you can have her." "We'll find her ourselves. Morgan's looking for her." "It'll be too bad for her if he does find her. Chromo has orders not to let her be taken alive." "You wouldn't do such a thing." Blackie shrugged. He was playing for high stakes, and he meant to win. "Chromo has no heart at all, Harrison. Suppose I won't give you the ranch? Then you'll never see your sweetheart again, I swear it." Harrison's face was chalky under his tan. His wound was hurting, and the mental anguish was terrific. "If I sign over the ranch," he growled, "you'll let Louise go free, not harm her?" That's it in a nutshell, Blackie agreed pleasantly. All right then, I'll do it. I have the proper legal forms right with me, Salem said, taking them from his inside coat pocket. Val Harrison was not the only one suffering. The masked rider, too, was in agony. If I go after Blackie, that devilish Apache'll slit the girl's throat, sure, he thought. But I just can't let Salem win. Painfully, Val Harrison turned on his side and took the ink pen which Blackie Salem handed him. He was giving up his patrimony to save Louise Allen, have her restored to him. You'll swear to let her go, Salem, if I do this? Yeah, as soon as all's settled and I've left here. Blackie had everything his own way. The masked rider pulled open the bedroom door and stepped into the lighted main room. Hold it, Harrison, he ordered in a voice vastly different from that of Wayne Morgan. Salem, you can't get away with this. Not while I'm alive and kicking. Blackie Salem's quick eyes darted over the dread figure in the black cape, black Stetson, and black domino mask. He feared the masked rider and had no idea that the Robin Hood outlaw was so close on his trail. Heavy guns showed at the masked rider's waist, guns that were known to be swift in dealing out retribution. Salem made no attempt to draw a pistol, but quickly stepped to the other side of the sofa so that Harrison lay between the masked rider and the showman. Then Blackie remembered he held the trump card. Harrison, he growled, if this outlaw touches me, Cromwell will finish Louise. Val Harrison's pain-racked eyes sought the slits in the domino mask, searching for guidance. I know you'd like to help me, masked rider, he said, but I'd rather be sure that girl I love is safe than to keep what property I own. Step away and let's get it over with. That's the sensible way to talk, crowed Blackie Salem, triumphant eyes as he mocked the masked rider. Cool as he appeared outwardly, slouched against the wall, eager as he was to have it out with Blackie Salem in a duel to the death, the masked rider was boiling with rage. As long as Salem held Louise, he had them, and the masked rider knew it. Blackie could torture Harrison into anything, and the masked rider did not doubt that Salem would carry out his threats if he were balked. Of course, he might trail Salem after the man made his cleanup and try to punish him. But there was always the chance that such an elusive criminal would shake him off. And then, just as he felt defeated by the sinister and clever Salem, the masked rider's keen ears caught a far-off cry. It was like the wail of a mountain lion, and it was repeated in a peculiar fashion, 3 times ringing in the purple ridges. Blue Hawk, thought the masked rider, and joy smote him. He shifted and cried harshly, Throw up your paws, Salem. Your time has come. No, gasped the wounded Harrison. They'll kill Louise. Blackie Salem had been watching the masked rider closely. He sensed the sudden change in the dark-clad outlaw's demeanor, the quick brightening of the eyes behind the mask slits. Salem dropped to one knee, whipping a heavy revolver from inside his black coat. Deliberately using the injured Harrison as a shield, his first shot cut a chunk from the flesh under the masked rider's left arm. It stung frightfully, and the shock so close to the heart sent a palpitation of pain through his whole system. His gun, however, had beaten Blackie Salem's as they had drawn together. He had been a shade ahead of the showman, but could only aim for Blackie's shoulder, sticking around the high end of Harrison's couch. He knew he had made a hit. Salem cursed, and his second bullet plugged into the wall a foot from the moving masked rider, trying to get around within clear shooting sight of his foe. Salem was hit. He was down out of sight. Harrison sought to reach for him, but Blackie slashed at him with his pistol. An instant later, Salem shot at the lamp on the table and the chimney smashed, flicking out the burning wick, plunging them into semi-darkness. The masked rider sprang for the couch. A gun blazed almost in his face, but the bullet missed him by inches. He could hear Salem running ahead of him, but his searching slug did not bring Blackie down. Salem swung into a bedroom door, slammed it, and as the masked rider hit it with all his weight, the bolt was shot, holding against him for precious moments. He drew back and crashed the door in. A cold draft hit his face. Salem had dropped from the open window. The masked rider, Colt in hand, blood streaming down his ribs, stuck out his head and shoulders. Blackie was just disappearing around the back corner, and a shot whistled past the masked rider's nose. His answer cut splinters from the spot where Salem had been a breath before. As he dived outside, he heard the shrill whistling of the lean killer. "Calling that Jaeger gang in," he muttered, dashing after Salem. It was Blackie's saddled horse that was near at hand. The masked rider glimpsed him as he leaped on his Mustang and spurred away, low over the animal. The masked rider began whistling, and Midnight galloped up to him, mounting and gripping the handsome black stallion's ribs with his powerful knees. He started on Blackie's trail. Chapter 14. Big Fight. Lackey Salem did not ride far. A long line of armed riders, the Jaeger outlaws, burst from the woods and brush and came tearing full tilt to meet their new leader. "There he is!" Salem roared. "Don't let him get free this time, boys!" They were coming in, formed in a half circle, cleverly spread out and placed. The masked rider realized he would be surrounded if he did not act quickly. He pulled Midnight around, and zigzagging, his guns barking at the spread-out gunmen, rode back and turned past the back of the rambling big ranch house. He had hardly passed the kitchen when he saw more masked bandits riding in from the opposite side. Blackie had the Star H surrounded, and this time the gunmen were riding far apart in a determined line, sure of their revenge on the masked rider. His pistols spat, and a man crashed off his horse, but a volley concentrated on him, touching his Stetson and stinging Midnight. Blackie Salem was urging his other gang in, and the masked rider was caught between the house and the low-flung stable. To hesitate would have proved fatal. The stable door was open, and he put Midnight to it, hugging the black's sleek neck as Midnight ran into the building. Leaping to the straw-covered floor, the masked rider slammed the oaken door and dropped the wooden bar. A howl of triumph arose outside. They were sure they had him now. He sprang to a small window slit, gun ready. Slugs were spitting into the wood, some coming through in thin spots. He shot carefully, but with no waste of precious seconds, downing 3 of the outlaws as they massed on him. "We'll smoke the skunk out," shouted Salem furiously. They started riding an Indian circle around the barn. Busy where he was, the masked rider was unable to get a bead on those at the blind back of the building. He knew what they were up to, setting fire to bundles of straw to burn him out. Steadily, he held those in front at bay. Smoke began blowing through the cracks in the wooden walls, and the stock in the barn stamped and whinnied in fear. The masked rider's face was grimly set as he listened, seeking to hear more distant sounds over the roaring pistols and shotguns, the cursing of the killers. He coughed, acrid smoke in his throat. The barn was filling with it, and when he glanced around, he could see the flames licking at the dry boards. At least he was keeping them busy, holding them off Val Harrison and the Star H. Then, from the back of the ranch house, a couple of men began shooting rifles, driving the bandits to cover. "Maybe I could make the kitchen door if I have to," the masked rider thought, for the smoke was growing unbearable. Midnight was coughing and dancing impatiently, while other horses in the stalls were jerking furiously at their halters. There was an open space between the stable and the house, but there was small chance he could cross it without being shot down. Blackie Salem was thirsting for his blood, and so were the Jaeger outlaws whom he had bested. "I'll have to chance it," he muttered. He ran back, loosening the horses, and was almost knocked over as they started out, wildly excited by the fire. Midnight protected him, staying close to him. The animals bunched at the main doors, and the masked rider mounted the black and kicked the bar out. He meant to emerge in the rush of the mustangs. A howl of fury rose in the smoky air. "There he is! Get him!" an outlaw shrieked. "Watch out!" Blackie Salem called a sudden warning to his gunmen. "Who's that?" The masked rider was shooting now, but they were swinging to face a new peril. The Robin Hood outlaw felt deep satisfaction as he found his plan working perfectly. Riders came sweeping in from all sides, 40 or 50 of them, howling war cries as they attacked. They had the outlaws caught in their ring, and shotguns and pistols spat at the masked bandits. They were rushers from that big camp at which the masked rider had called before coming to the Star H after Salem. What he had told these men had interested them so greatly that they had freely offered their help. Now they were here, ready for vengeance, to arrest or shoot down the bandit crew. With these reinforcements, the masked rider swerved and started at a knot of Jaeger outlaws who were shooting at the approaching citizens. His Colts blared death and destruction to the enemy. Cursing, terror-stricken bandits took lead or threw up their hands in surrender. The clang of battle rose high on the night air. Smoke from the burning barn gave the red-glowing surroundings an infernal aspect. 10 outlaws went down in the first surge of the unexpected attack. A bunch that had nearly got free, only to face a determined ring of fighting men, had to turn and come back past the masked rider, whose deadly Colts roared over and over again. The rushers were closing their circle, trapping all but a few lucky outlaws who slipped through the noose. The masked rider's pistols were hot in his hands as he shoved fresh shells into the cylinders. "I want Blackie," he muttered, flipping sweat from his eyes. A group of swirling, beaten bandits parted, and in their midst the masked rider glimpsed his arch-enemy, Blackie Salem. "Throw down, Salem," he bellowed, "or I'll shoot." Blackie refused to surrender. Several of his men obeyed the command, for armed citizens were swinging on them. Salim's pistol spat fire and lead, but the slug only touched the masked rider's Stetson crown and whirled on through air. The masked rider, driving straight into the heart of the foe, shot Blackie Salem once, striking the cursing murderer's twisted face and finishing him off. The sinister plotter against the purple ridges was slewed off his Mustang as his animal, terrified by the flaming guns in its face, reared up and leapt to the side. Blackie landed on the ground, crumpled up in death. With the end of the raiders' chief came the end of the fight. The remaining outlaws threw their weapons to the ground, crying out in surrender. Citizens began seizing them, tying their hands to their saddle horns, herding them together. A bucket brigade was formed to put out the barn fire, pails being passed from the big watering trough. The masked rider, bleeding from several wounds, dismounted and limped in through the back door of the house to the living room. "Salem's dead, and the gang's busted Val," he growled. Val Harrison was propped up on his couch, "Ryder," Val cried, "you saved us and the ranch, but now that Apache will kill her." "Keep your shirt on, Harrison," the masked rider said coolly. "I'll be back, pronto." One UTSIDE, the Star H ranch house, he called the Black Stallion and rode off into the darkness. None tried to stop him, for it was who had brought these men to capture the bandits. A cheer went up, floating after him as the masked rider headed for the gates and disappeared in the night. He began calling, soon his signal floating off on the breeze. A reply reached him, and he rode toward it. After a time, he sighted a horseman, a ghostly figure on a gray mount. Blue Hawk, his faithful comrade of the danger trail. "Blue Hawk," he exclaimed, "you're alone. Where is she?" "This way, senor," the Yaqui said quietly. The masked rider glanced quickly at the lean, dark, high-boned face. Blue Hawk, he read, was pleased with himself in his quiet, stolid Indian way. Blue Hawk held up something attached to his belt. "What's that?" demanded the masked rider. Blue Hawk handed it to him without a word. The masked rider struck a match to examine the object, although the feel of it told him what he would see. It was a chunk of black, straight hair attached to a large patch of brown scalp. "Apache hair," grunted the masked rider. "See." Back there, in some dark spot to which he had trailed his enemy, the Yaqui had met Chromo, the Apache. Silent as a moving panther, stealing in with his long knife with such genius that even Chromo had not detected his approach, Blue Hawk had sprung upon his foe. In some hidden clump, the body of Chromo now lay, to be discovered by the buzzards and wolves of the purple ridges. Blue Hawk led him back along the trail, turned into a faint path that led them to a bower in the woods. Louise Allen leaped up as they approached. More, nor Chromo, nor Buff. "Val's wounded, but he'll recover, especially when he sees you're all right." "You're so good," she murmured, and leaned back against him as midnight carried them to the ranch. Blue Hawk stayed off in the darkness while the masked rider escorted Louise Allen back to Harrison's. As he rode, it was with a wistful longing in his heart. He, too,